The small research ship shook violently as it entered Earth's atmosphere. Inside, Zira gripped the control panel, her blue fingers working desperately across the flashing screens. This was supposed to be a simple observation mission, her first solo expedition as a junior scientist from Elorn. Now, warning lights flashed across her console as the ship's systems failed one by one. Emergency landing protocols engaged. The ship's computer announced in a calm voice that contrasted sharply with Zira's panic. She had only meant to orbit this primitive world, to gather data from a safe distance. The Elornian Science Academy had strict rules about non-interference with developing planets. Earth was classified as potentially dangerous, a world whose dominant species had advanced technology, but still engaged in warfare and environmental destruction. Zira checked her emergency beacon. Damage. She would have to survive until her scheduled check-in period passed and her people sent help, if they could find her at all. Warning. Critical system failure. Brace for impact, the computer said. Through the viewport, Zira saw trees rushing up to meet her. The dense forest of northern Michigan, though she didn't know the human name for this place, spread out below her doomed vessel. The ship clipped the tops of tall pine trees, sending it spinning. Zira closed her eyes as the craft slammed into the ground. The impact threw her against her safety harness. Pain shot through her slender body. Something warm trickled down her forehead, her pale purple blood flowing from a gash. Her vision blurred as the ship's hull cracked open, exposing her to Earth's air. Luckily, her species could breathe in this atmosphere, though the higher oxygen content made her feel lightheaded. When the ringing in her ears subsided, Zira heard strange sounds from outside, calls and cries of Earth creatures, curious about the smoking object that had fallen from their sky. She tried to stand but collapsed back into her seat. Her right leg wouldn't support her weight. "Help," she whispered in her native language, knowing no one would understand. The word felt hollow in the alien forest. Zira managed to pull herself from the wreckage, dragging her injured leg behind her. The ship had carved a long trench through the forest floor. Pieces of her vessel lay scattered among broken trees. The air smelled of burnt metal and strange plant life. She needed shelter and medical supplies. Her personal medical kit was still attached to her belt, but it contained only basic treatments. Zira pulled out a small device and pressed it against her leg. A cooling sensation spread through the injury as the device released healing gel. It would help, but she needed proper care. Night was approaching. The sky darkened above the trees, and unfamiliar stars began to appear. Zira had studied Earth from afar, but being on its surface was overwhelming. The gravity felt slightly stronger than home. The air carried countless new smells. And the sounds, constant rustling, chirping, and distant howls, made her nervous. She limped back to the ship to retrieve what supplies remained usable. Her food would last 2 weeks at most. The emergency shelter pack was intact. But as she gathered these items, she noticed movement in the undergrowth around the crash site. Yellow eyes reflected the fading light. Low growls came from multiple directions. Earth predators, drawn by the commotion and the scent of her blood. Zira clutched her small utility laser. It wasn't designed as a weapon, but it might scare the creatures away. As the first wolf emerged from the bushes, teeth bared, she realized how vulnerable she truly was. More wolves appeared, circling, assessing this strange new creature in their territory. Her hand trembled as she aimed the laser. The approaching night grew colder. Zira backed against the broken hull of her ship as the pack of wolves closed in, curious and hungry. She was alone on a hostile world, injured, with no way to call for help. The wolves moved closer, and Zira prepared for the worst. Jack Harris drove his Forest Service truck slowly along the narrow dirt road. The tall pines created a tunnel of green above him. He had been a ranger in this part of Michigan for 15 years now. The forest was more his home than the small cabin where he slept. He liked the quiet of these woods. After serving in the army and seeing too much pain, the peaceful forest healed something inside him. Jack chose the most remote patrol routes, preferring trees and animals to people. As he rounded a bend, he noticed something odd. A line of broken trees stretched into the distance. Whatever had happened was recent. The scent of smoke hung in the air. "That's not right," he said to himself, parking his truck. He grabbed his backpack with first aid supplies, a flashlight, and water. If someone had crashed a small plane, they might need help. Jack followed the path of destruction. The trees were not just broken, but burned in places. After walking nearly half a mile, he stopped suddenly. What lay before him was not what he expected. The object was clearly not a plane. Its metal skin had an unusual purple-silver color. Strange symbols were etched into parts that hadn't been damaged in the crash. Jack had seen military aircraft before, but this was different. "What in the world?" he whispered. A sound caught his attention. Growls. A pack of wolves had formed a circle around something near the crashed object. In his years as a ranger, Jack knew wolves rarely attacked humans, but they seemed focused on something at the center of their circle. He moved closer and saw her. The figure was clearly female, but unlike any woman Jack had ever seen. Her skin was pale blue. Her hair, if you could call it that, looked like fine silver wires. She was holding what appeared to be a small tool that emitted a weak red light. The wolves approached cautiously, confused by this strange creature, but drawn by the scent of her purple blood. Jack didn't hesitate. He pulled out his whistle and blew hard. The sharp sound echoed through the trees. He waved his arms and shouted. The wolves turned toward him, startled. Most backed away, but one held its ground, teeth bared. Jack picked up a stick and threw it, hitting the ground near the wolf. Finally, the last wolf retreated, disappearing into the forest with the rest of the pack. The blue-skinned woman collapsed as soon as the wolves left. Jack approached carefully. His mind was spinning with questions. Was this a person in costume? Some kind of government experiment? But the crashed ship and her unusual appearance seemed too elaborate for any explanation except the most obvious one. She wasn't human. She wasn't from Earth. Jack knelt beside her. The alien woman was breathing but unconscious. Purple blood seeped from a wound on her leg and another on her forehead. Whatever she was injured and needed help. His training kicked in. Injury was injury. Pain was pain. No matter who or what was suffering. He opened his first aid kit and began cleaning her wounds. The blood was thicker than human blood but behaved similarly. He applied pressure to stop the bleeding, then bandaged her injuries. Jack knew he should report this. There were procedures for crash aircraft, but something told him that calling this in would lead to men in dark suits taking her away to some secret facility. He had seen how governments treated things they didn't understand. "I can't leave you here," he said, though he knew she couldn't understand him. The alien woman was small and lightweight. Jack carefully lifted her in his arms. Night was falling, and the temperature would drop soon. The wolves might return. As he carried her through the forest toward his truck, Jack realized his life had just become much more complicated. But for the first time in years, he felt something new. Purpose. Zira opened her eyes slowly. A wooden ceiling came into focus above her. She was lying on something soft in a warm room. This was not her ship. This was not home. The events of the crash flooded back into her mind, and she tried to sit up quickly. Pain shot through her body, forcing her back down. "Easy there," a deep voice said. Zira turned her head to see a human male sitting in a chair nearby. He was tall with light brown skin and short dark hair. His face had lines around the eyes and mouth that suggested he spent much time outdoors. He wore a green uniform with a patch on the sleeve. Fear gripped her. Humans were unpredictable creatures according to her training. Some were peaceful, others violent. She had no way to know which kind had found her. The man raised his hands, palms out, in what seemed to be a calming gesture. "You're safe here," he said slowly. Zira didn't understand the words, but his tone was gentle. She glanced down at her leg and saw it had been wrapped in white material. The human had treated her wounds. Why would he do that if he meant harm? She looked around the small room. It was simple but comfortable. A fire burned in a stone fireplace. Through a window, she could see trees and falling snow. She was in some kind of forest dwelling. "My name is Jack," the human said, pointing to himself. Jack. Zira understood this was a self-identifier. She pointed to herself. Zira. The man, Jack, smiled. Zira, he repeated, pronouncing it correctly. "Nice to meet you, though I wish it was under better circumstances." Zira reached for the small device at her belt. It was still there. The human hadn't taken her possessions. She activated the device, and it projected a small holographic screen. Jack's eyes widened in surprise. The device was a universal translator, standard issue for all Elornian scientists. It needed time to learn a new language, but it could begin the process. Zira spoke into it, and the device recorded her words in her native tongue. "I need to learn your language," she said, knowing Jack wouldn't understand yet. Jack watched with fascination as she worked with the device. After a moment, he seemed to understand what she needed. He began pointing at objects around the room and naming them. Table, chair, window, fire, blanket. Zira's translator recorded each word with its visual reference. The learning process would take time, but it was a start. An hour passed as they continued this basic exchange. Jack was patient, repeating words when needed. Zira's translator began to build a simple vocabulary. Finally, she attempted her first words in English. "Thank you. Help me," the device translated, its voice mechanical but understandable. Jack's face brightened. "You're welcome. Are you hungry?" The translator processed this new phrase, and Zira understood. She nodded, a gesture she noted humans used for affirmation. Jack moved to a small kitchen area and returned with a bowl of something warm. "Soup," he said. "Try it slowly." Zira carefully tasted the liquid. It was unlike anything on her world, but not unpleasant. Her species could consume most carbon-based food with caution. As she ate, Jack sketched on a piece of paper. He drew the crashed ship, then himself carrying her away from it. He drew wolves and made howling sounds. He was explaining what had happened. "Wolves attack. I help," he said simply. "Why help?" Zira's translator asked. Jack thought for a moment. "Because you needed it," he said finally. This simple answer confused Zira. On her world, strangers rarely helped each other without obligation or payment. The human's actions made no logical sense. Yet here she was, safe and warm because of him. As night fell outside the cabin window, Zira realized she had much to learn about humans. Perhaps they were not as primitive as her people believed. 3 days passed in Jack's cabin. Zira's translator improved with each conversation. Her leg was healing faster than a human's would, which surprised Jack. She explained that her people, the Elornians, had advanced medical science. The small device she had used on herself helped her body heal quickly. "We need to get your things from the crash site," Jack said over breakfast. "Someone will find your ship soon." Zira nodded. Her translator now caught most of his words. "Yes, important equipment there. Need my research data." Jack looked out the window. No snow had fallen overnight. "We should go today. I've been listening to my radio. Forest Service reported something fell from the sky. They're organizing a search." This worried Zira. "Your government. They will take me." Jack nodded grimly. "Probably. And I doubt they'd let you go home." He didn't need to explain further. Zira understood. Her people had studied Earth from afar. They knew how humans often reacted to things they didn't understand. After breakfast, they drove in Jack's truck as close as they could to the crash site. The final mile, they walked through the forest. Jack carried a backpack and stayed alert for others who might be searching the area. When they reached the ship, Zira gasped. It looked worse in daylight. The once elegant craft was torn open like a fruit. Parts were scattered across the forest floor. "Hurry," Jack said, keeping watch. Zira moved quickly through the wreckage. She gathered small devices and data storage units. One box was especially important, her personal log containing all her observations of Earth. She found her emergency pack with supplies and medicine. Last, she took a small silver sphere from a hidden compartment. "What's that?" Jack asked. "Communication device. Might fix. Call home." They heard voices in the distance. People were coming through the forest. "Time to go," Jack whispered. They hurried away from the crash, taking a different route back to the truck. As they drove away, they passed two Forest Service vehicles heading toward the area. Jack kept his face turned away and drove normally. Back at the cabin, Zira organized her salvaged equipment. Most was damaged, but some items still worked. She explained each one to Jack. A scanner that could analyze materials, a small medical kit with treatments for injuries and illness, the damaged communication device she hoped to repair. "Your technology is amazing," Jack said, examining a small light that hovered above Zira's hand without any visible support. "Your world is amazing," Zira replied. "So much life, so much water, so many different people." She showed Jack images of her homeworld stored in one of her devices. Elorn was beautiful but different from Earth. The sky was pale purple. The plants were mostly blue and silver. The cities were built to blend with the natural landscape. My mission was to observe Earth only, not to make contact. My people think humans are too violent, too divided to join the galactic community. Jack couldn't argue with that assessment. "We have our problems," he admitted. "But also kindness," Zira added, looking at Jack. "You saved me. No reason. Just helped." Jack smiled. Not all humans would have done the same. Not all Elornians would help a strange creature either, Zira confessed. As night fell, Jack turned on his small radio to hear the news. The broadcaster described a meteor that had fallen in the national forest. Officials were investigating. Jack and Zira exchanged worried looks. "They will find signs I was there," Zira said. "And that you helped me." Jack nodded slowly. "Then we need a better hiding place. And I know just the person who can help us." Kate Miller lived on a small farm 20 miles from Jack's cabin. She had been a doctor in the Army before returning to her family's land. Jack knew her from his service days, and she was the only person he truly trusted. When Jack's truck pulled up to her farmhouse, Kate came out onto the porch. Her red hair was tied back, and she wore work clothes covered in dirt from gardening. She smiled until she saw the serious look on Jack's face. "Kate, I need your help," Jack said. "And you need to promise to keep a secret." Kate nodded slowly. "You know I will. What's going on?" Jack opened the passenger door of his truck. Zira stepped out, wearing Jack's spare clothes and a hat that partially covered her blue skin and silver hair. Even so, it was clear she wasn't human. Kate's eyes widened, but she didn't scream or run. Instead, she looked at Jack. "Inside. Now. Before anyone sees." In Kate's kitchen, Jack explained everything. How he found Zira, saved her from wolves, and helped her recover her things from the crash. Kate listened without interrupting. When he finished, she turned to Zira. "Are you injured? Do you need medical help?" Zira's translator processed the questions. "I am healing. But thank you." Kate smiled. "You're welcome to stay in my guest room. The farm is private. No unexpected visitors." That night, after dinner, the three sat in Kate's living room. Zira showed them more images of her world. Her people lived in harmony with their environment. They had solved problems that still troubled Earth: clean energy, food for all, peace between nations. "Your music is most interesting," Zira said. Kate had played her guitar after dinner. "We have music, but not like yours. Ours is more mathematical." Jack asked her to explain. Zira used her device to play Elornian music. The sounds were beautiful but strange, like crystal bells and flowing water, following patterns that seemed both random and perfectly ordered. "Our art is also different," Zira said. She showed them images of Elornian art. shapes and colors that changed as you watched them, telling stories through movement and light. In return, Kate showed Zira books of earth art, paintings by famous artists, photographs of natural wonders. Zira was fascinated by how humans captured still moments of beauty. "Your species feels deeply," she observed. "You put emotion into everything." "That's both our strength and our weakness," Jack said. As days passed, Zira learned more Earth customs. Kate taught her to cook simple meals. Jack showed her how to plant seeds in Kate's garden. These ordinary tasks were new adventures for Zira, whose life on Elorn had been focused on science and study. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Zira turned to Jack. "Why do you live alone in the forest?" Jack was quiet for a moment. "I saw bad things in the war. Did bad things too. The forest is quiet. It helps me forget." Zira nodded. "On Elorn, we have mind healers for soldiers. They help remove painful memories." "That sounds nice," Jack said. "But maybe some memories should stay, even the painful ones. They remind us to be better." This idea was new to Zira. Her people believed in removing pain when possible. But watching Jack, how he carried his past, yet still showed kindness, made her wonder if there was wisdom in his words. That night, as Zira worked on repairing her communication device, she made a decision. Her report to Elorn would not simply be scientific observations. She would tell them about Jack and Kate, about human kindness, about how there was more to this species than her people had believed. Morning sunlight streamed through the kitchen window as Jack, Kate, and Zira ate breakfast. 2 weeks had passed since they arrived at the farm. Zira's health had fully returned, and she was learning more about Earth each day. The radio on the counter suddenly caught their attention. Officials continued to investigate the unidentified object that crashed in Maple County Forest. Sources say unusual materials were recovered from the site. The public is asked to report any suspicious activities or persons. Jack turned the radio off. "They're not giving up." Kate looked worried. "Someone might have seen you at the crash site, or tracked your truck." As if confirming her fears, they heard the sound of vehicles approaching on the gravel road. Jack moved to the window and looked out. 2 black SUVs were coming toward the farmhouse. "Government agents," he said quietly. "We need to go. Now." They had prepared for this possibility. Kate grabbed a pre-packed bag of supplies while Jack helped Zira gather her devices. They moved quickly through the house to the back door. "Take my old truck," Kate said, handing Jack the keys. "It's behind the barn. I'll stall them." Jack hesitated. "They might arrest you for helping us." Kate smiled. "I'll deny everything. Say you were just visiting. Now go." Jack and Zira slipped out the back door and ran toward the barn. They could hear car doors slamming in the front yard and men's voices calling out. From behind the barn, Jack watched as a woman in a dark suit approached Kate on the porch. She showed some kind of badge. "I'm Agent Diane Peters. We're looking for Jack Harris. We know he's been here." Kate crossed her arms. "He visited last week. Haven't seen him since." Agent Peters didn't look convinced. "We have reason to believe he's harboring a person of interest. This is a matter of national security." While they talked, Jack and Zira made it to the old truck. It started with a loud rumble. Too loud. Agent Peters turned at the sound, and her eyes narrowed. "Check behind the barn," she ordered the other agents. Jack didn't wait. He drove the truck across the field, away from the road. It wasn't meant for off-road travel, but they had no choice. "Hold on," he told Zira as they bounced over the rough ground. Behind them, agents ran toward their vehicles. One man tried to follow on foot, but stopped when he saw how far they had already gone. Jack drove until they reached the woods at the edge of Kate's property. The truck couldn't go further, so they abandoned it and continued on foot. Zira carried her partially repaired communication device. "Will your friend be okay?" Zira asked as they hiked deeper into the forest. "Kate is smart. She'll convince them she didn't know anything," Jack said, hoping it was true. They walked for hours, following animal trails. Jack knew these woods well from his ranger work. By evening, they reached an old hunting cabin he remembered. It was small and dusty but would provide shelter for the night. As they sat by a small fire, Zira looked troubled. "I cannot call my world for rescue. The device is not fully repaired. How long until your people realize you're missing?" "My mission was for 6 Earth months. They will not look for me until then." Zira's silver eyes reflected the firelight. "That is 3 more months from now." Jack nodded slowly. "They couldn't hide for that long. Not with government agents searching for them." "There is something I didn't tell you," Zira said quietly. "My people have been to Earth before, long ago. They left things here. Technology. In safe places." Jack looked at her with surprise. "Things that could help us." "Yes, a communication station. It would let me contact my world immediately." Zira's eyes met Jack's. "But it is far from here, and very well hidden." In the distance, they heard the faint sound of helicopters. The search was intensifying. They had little time to waste. Dawn broke over the mountains as Jack and Zira continued their journey. They had left the hunting cabin before sunrise, keeping off main trails. Zira studied a small map she had created on one of her devices. "The hidden station is in a cave system," she explained, "about 20 miles north. My people chose remote locations on your planet for their observation posts." Jack adjusted his backpack. 20 miles is a long walk through these mountains." "We have no choice," Zira said. "If your government captures me, they will study me like an animal. They might learn enough about my technology to threaten my world." They hiked all day, stopping only briefly to rest and eat. Jack was impressed by Zira's stamina. Though smaller than him, she moved with surprising strength and grace over the difficult terrain. As evening approached, they heard a helicopter in the distance. They quickly took cover under a rocky overhang. The helicopter passed overhead, its searchlights scanning the forest below. "They're using heat sensors," Jack whispered. "We need to mask our body heat." Zira reached into her pack and pulled out a small silver blanket. "This will block their scanners. My people use these for research in extreme environments." They huddled close together under the blanket until the helicopter moved away. The closeness made Jack aware of how much he had come to care for Zira. She was no longer just a strange visitor he had rescued. She was a friend. At nightfall, they reached a series of rocky cliffs. Zira's device beeped softly. "We are close," she said. "The entrance should be behind a waterfall." They followed a small stream until it widened and then dropped off a cliff edge, creating a 30-foot waterfall. The moonlight made the falling water shine like silver. "How do we get behind it?" Jack asked. Zira pointed to a narrow ledge that ran along the cliff face. "We must be careful. The rocks will be slippery." Slowly, they edged their way along the ledge. The spray from the waterfall made the path treacherous. Jack went first, testing each step. Zira followed close behind. Finally, they'd reached a gap in the rock wall, hidden by the curtain of water. Inside was a dry tunnel that led deep into the mountain. Zira used one of her devices to light their way. The walls of the tunnel were too smooth to be natural. "Your people made this?" Jack asked. "Yes, 300 of your years ago," Zira said. "A research team spent 10 years studying Earth's plants and animals." The tunnel opened into a large cave. At the center stood a metal structure unlike anything Jack had seen before. It was shaped like a giant silver tree, with branches reaching toward the ceiling. Soft blue lights began to glow as they approached. "It recognized my biology," Zira explained. She placed her hand on a panel, and more lights activated. The tree hummed with energy. "What exactly is this place?" Jack asked, looking around in wonder. "A communication hub, but also a library. It contains all the information my people gathered about Earth." Zira moved her hands over the control panel, including their recommendations about future contact with humans. Data appeared in the air around them, images and symbols that Jack couldn't understand. Zira studied them intently. "This cannot be right," she whispered. "What is it?" Jack moved closer. "According to this data, my people were preparing to make official contact with Earth. They found humans to be promising, despite your wars. They saw potential in your art, your compassion, your resilience." Zira looked at Jack with wide eyes. But something happened. The contact mission was canceled. The research team left suddenly. "Why?" Jack asked. Before Zira could answer, an alarm sounded from one of her devices. "Something is approaching. Multiple vehicles." Jack's heart sank. "They found us." Jack peered out through the waterfall. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness below. Agents were climbing the path toward their hiding place. "We're trapped," he said. "No way out except through them." Zira worked frantically at the control panel of the ancient communication station. "I need more time. I can send a message to my world." The sound of voices grew closer. Jack grabbed a rock, ready to defend them, though he knew it was hopeless against trained agents with guns. Suddenly, a familiar voice called out, "Jack, are you in there?" "It's me, Kate." Jack and Zira exchanged surprised looks. Jack moved cautiously to the cave entrance and called back, "Kate, is that really you?" "Yes, I'm with Agent Peters. We need to talk to you both." Jack hesitated. It could be a trick to lure them out. But then Kate appeared at the entrance, followed by the government agent they had seen at the farm. Neither woman had a weapon drawn. "Please listen," Kate said. "Things have changed." Agent Peters stepped forward. Her face looked tired, but her eyes were kind. "Mr. Harris, I'm not here to arrest you or harm your friend. I need to speak with both of you." Jack stood protectively in front of Zira. "Why should we trust you?" "Because I've seen the evidence from the crash site," Agent Peters said. "And I've seen how Dr. Miller defended you both. This situation is bigger than following orders." Zira moved to stand beside Jack. "What do you want?" "The truth," Agent Peters said simply, "and maybe a chance to help." Inside the cave, they sat in a circle illuminated by the blue glow of the Elornian technology. Agent Peters explained that after examining the materials from Zira's ship, she realized they were facing something beyond government protocols. "My superiors want to capture you for study," she told Zira. "But I don't believe that's right. Kate helped me understand what's really happening here." Kate smiled at Jack. "I told her how you saved Zira, how you chose compassion over fear." "So what happens now?" Jack asked. Agent Peters looked around at the ancient Elornian station. "You're trying to contact your people, aren't you?" she asked Zira. Zira nodded. "Yes, but the station needs time to fully activate." "Then let me help you," Agent Peters said. "I can keep my team searching elsewhere for a few hours. That should give you time." Jack couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Why would you risk your career for us?" Agent Peters smiled sadly. "Because sometimes doing what's right matters more than following orders, and because this could be the beginning of something important for all of humanity." With Agent Peters' help, Zira completed the activation sequence. The silver tree structure hummed louder, and a beam of light shot up through an opening in the cave ceiling. "Message sent," Zira said. "My people will respond soon." They waited together through the night. Kate and Jack shared stories from their past. Agent Peters spoke about her hopes for peaceful contact. Zira told them more about her world. At dawn, the communication station chimed. A holographic image appeared above the control panel, 3 Elornian officials in formal attire. "Researcher Zira," one of them said, "we received your emergency signal. A rescue ship is already on its way." Zira stepped forward. "Honored elders, I have important information. Humans are not as our reports described. They are capable of great compassion. These humans saved my life and protected me, asking nothing in return." The Elornian officials looked surprised. One of them leaned forward. "This contradicts our previous findings. We will need to reevaluate. I respectfully request that you consider official first contact," Zira said. starting with these humans who have shown the best of what their species can be. As the sun rose over the mountains, humans and Elornians began a conversation that would change both worlds forever. What had begun with a crash landing and a single act of kindness now opened the door to a new future for two civilizations.